Hey, my name is Eric from Weights and Measures, and thanks for joining me on my episode of The Spin, the Articulated Fly podcast brought to you by Nor-vise. And what I'd like to talk to you today a little bit about is the Palmer wrap technique, because I use that an awful lot in the flies that I'm tying, especially for bigger predators and articulated patterns. But let's start off by talking about the three different materials that we're going to cover. The first is a simple hackle feather. I'll touch on the technique using overlaid hen saddle feathers, and then we'll wrap it up by talking about bucktail or craft fur brushes and how that technique works, and I'll give you some of my tips and tricks. Let's start off by taking a look at the Palmer wrap technique in a more traditional sense. I have a pretty straightforward woolly bugger pattern here in the vise, and all I need to do is finish the fly by wrapping my hackle feather around the shank of the hook. And in this example, we're going to use the more traditional style of Palmer wrapping, which is to leave some space between each wrap as I bring this from the back of the hook all the way up to the bead. I'm maintaining tension on the center of the feather here. Bring it all the way up to the bead, and I'm going to secure that down with 3 thread wraps. And I can cut off the tag end. In this example, you can see the spacing left here in between each wrap, and while I was wrapping that feather up to the bead, I'm gently bringing those fibers backwards so that they're all facing that same direction. I'll finish this with a half hitch, trim off my thread, and this fly is ready to roll. In that first example, we were looking at a traditional version of the Palmer wrap, but let's take a look at that same technique but applied for a streamer pattern. In this example, I'm going to take feathers once again, but these are 3 hen saddle feathers. And what I'm going to do is palmer those feathers around the shank of this shank and start building up the taper for a fly like this feather game changer howitzer popper. I'll tie all 3 of these feathers in together by the tip. With the tag end of those feathers facing to the rear of the shank. Now in this example, as I wrap these 3 feathers around the hook shank towards the eye, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pinch the feather fibers and draw them backward or rearward. And what that will do is as I wrap these around, that's going to align all of those fibers together and create a sort of opened umbrella appearance once these wraps have been completed. Every wrap, as I exchange hands, I do the same thing by pulling those feather fibers rearward. And you can see by pinching those together and drawing them backward, they're all angling in the same direction. I'm here at the eye, and I'll secure those with 3 thread wraps. Pull everything back and add 3 additional wraps. Trim the tag ends of the saddle feathers, add a few extra wraps to secure. And you can see how now those fibers are all facing rearward, stacked on top of each other. In this case, I was wrapping those turns tightly together and maintaining those fiber directions as I went along. I can finish this with a half hitch. Trim my thread and continue adding sections to build up a fly that might look something like this. There's the Palmer wrap using hen saddle feathers. But now I want to highlight the same technique while either using a much larger synthetic brush, something like Chocolate's Finesse body material or body chenille, or even a much larger brush application like working with Bucktail. I tie the majority of my large pike and musky flies using Bucktail brushes, and I apply that same Palmer technique. So in the vise I have a 35mm shank, and just for demonstration we'll start here near the back, and I'll tie in the brush at the back, the shank, and bring my thread forward. And now the Palmer wrap technique that we're going to show here is just a little bit more extreme. And some things that I will point out will be maintaining tension with your brush hand, in my case my right hand, and showing you that same pinch technique with my left hand or my offhand. The Palmer technique again is to align those fibers all in the same direction. And in this example, I'm pulling them back toward the vise. And as I pinch, I maintain tension on the center line here of the brush, and I wrap that around the shank. Maintaining tension with your brush hand is the most important, and followed by pinching your fibers together, drawing them backward, and wrapping them up the shank. Finish here with a half hitch. And I'm ready to either add my next shank section, or depending on the style of fly, adding flash, feathers, whatever the pattern calls for. And that's the Palmer wrap technique on a Bucktail brush. Thanks for watching. I hope you learned a little bit about the Palmer wrap technique, and I hope it helps you out on your woolly bugger patterns if you are learning to build up the taper on articulated flies, or really getting into big streamer patterns with brushwork. Make sure you check out the Articulated Fly podcast and listen to my episode of The Spin. Thanks to Norvise, and thanks for watching.